Good. Excellent, excellent. Hi, Toni.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. It's good to see you again. And we're just getting into the group here. That's great. I'm just going to do this. And then we're just going to wait for people to come on in. Hello, everybody. Just waiting for people to come in the room. Please say hi when you come on in. And we've got the wonderful Toni Shelbourne here. We're going to be talking about quite a bit of stuff, I think, Toni. Oh, here they come. Oh, hi, Lisa. Great to see you. Hello from Canada. Good. So we're just going to let people come in, Toni. So, well, you've been busy.
Oh yeah, always busy.
Always busy. I know.
Always got a project on the go.
Just before we come on to these things, we're going to talk about some of these things. Oh, hi, Christine. Hi, another Lisa. Hi, Tyler. Before we get going, Toni, I just want to say to people in the group, hi, Carol. Some of you might have seen that we had a bit of a blitz on us of not very nice comments from a small group of people that wanted to hit the group earlier. I think we just get targeted sometimes, I know. But I think I've dealt with them all. I really want to keep the group a public group and a safe space. So if you see stuff that is really horrible, some of the comments were really horrible. I know they were kind of like quite, I think well, they were shock jock style trainers just deciding to kind of jump on us. If you see anything you don't like in the group, just report it to admin. All right, just report it to admin, whether that's spam or people even talking in an unkind way. We can disagree about stuff, that's fine. We can have discussions, that's fine. But we've got to keep the group safe, and we can do that together. So apologies for anybody who saw some of that stuff, but it's all been got rid of now, and I've obviously banned people. It'll be a shame if we had to make the group private, because then we lose some of the impact that we have by being able to share out publicly, but let's just keep an eye on it. So, Toni, sorry about that, a little bit of housekeeping. Well, it's great to have you. And obviously, we've known each other. It feels like forever, isn't it, when you think back to the old days when life was simpler.
Yeah.
Before we come on to the main topic tonight, is going to be about sleep, guys. And I'd like to get some of your questions and answers later, actually, but hold back on them a little bit for now, because I'll miss them. But I'll kind of just let you all know when it's time to start putting some bits and bobs in, and I can ask Toni while she's here. But let's just hear a bit about you then, Toni. It's nice to have you in a non kind of like presenting way, just to have you as a person and a human being. So tell us a little bit about your story. How did you come to working with dogs? What was your journey through?
Well, it started back in the late 80s. Remember back in the 80s when you had like all those weird hairstyles and stuff? I was on track to work in theatre. I wanted to be an actress, or I wanted to do stage management. I was all about the arts. And one summer at college, we did a group of friends we went on this walk. We did a charity walk from Land's End to Deal back down to Hastings, and all the boys were dressed in like medieval kind of stuff. It was like the knights were like walking. We were raising money for a charity for MS. And we stopped at Brighton, and in that time there was a aquarium, and they had dolphins, and I spent the afternoon watching these poor dolphins circling around this tiny pool, and every time they got to me they stopped and looked at me and then circled again. And that night I was just sat on the beach, and I thought, do you know what, I've always loved animals. What am I doing going into a career that is going to be really tough and I'm not that great at it, when I really want to help animals? And that was kind of the start of my journey. So I came home from that walk and I finished college, and I got a job with guide dogs in kennels, $3,500 a year, living in the Wokingham Centre. And it's all kind of sparked from there, really. So I had 11 years in guide dogs, had an amazing time with them, learned so much, so grateful. They gave me so many skills. But then I had a friend who was learning to be a TTouch practitioner for horses. And I had a conversation with her one day, and I got so hooked, I ended up training as a TTouch practitioner, as everybody knows. Everyone knows now I'm an instructor in TTouch. And then in 2000, guide dogs wanted to ask me to do another move. So I've moved from Wokingham, I'd gone to Middlesbrough, I'd come back down to Berkshire to head office. And then they wanted me to go to Leamington. I was like, I'm settled, I've got a house, I'm happy. So I took redundancy and then just started doing my TTouch stuff as, all full time, as it were. Or used to have a little part-time job to kind of go along with that. And then, it sort of just sprung from there, really. Then I got to work with the wolves for 10 years. And then I, did this, that, and the other. And I upped all my qualifications so I can call myself a behaviourist and all that. And then I got into writing, and I'm slightly dyslexic. So I don't know how I've ended up writing all these articles and books. Probably Karen Bush, who I write with, probably is like, yeah, well, I know, because she does all the editing and kind of sorts it all out. So sometimes my sentence construction might be a bit weird. But that's kind of my journey. It's been a journey of something like 33, 34 years now working with dogs. And I love it. I wouldn't do anything else.
Tell us a bit about the wolves, because that's really interesting. So how did that come about, and in what capacity were you with the wolves?
So I was sat at home one day, phone rings. This lady on the phone goes, I'm a wolf handler from the UK Wolf Conservation Trust. And I sort of know a little bit about TTouch, and I've done some on the wolves, and I think they like it. But I'd be really interested to see if somebody who knows what they're doing does some with them. So I got invited up for just an afternoon. It was just me and a couple of handlers. Well, 10 years later, I left, and after that, I became a handler, then a senior handler. I was then head of welfare for a while for the wolves. But also, sadly, our founder died, and you had to have a senior person on site in the week to run the school programme. You couldn't have a wolf out of the enclosure unless you had someone experienced enough to run the walks to, obviously make it safe. So I was like, well, do you know what? I could do that part-time along with my behaviour stuff and my TTouch stuff. So I then also became the education officer for the trust as well. So it kind of is one of these things that kind of snowballs. And then it was from there that I was like, do you know what? I'm watching all these wolves, and they're not doing what everyone tells you, this is how you do it, because that's how wolves do it with dogs. So I was like, I'll write a book about it. So that's where the book Dispelling the myths of dog training comes from.
Yeah, because I say you've written, one of your books was about wolves, wasn't it? One of the early books.
Yeah, so The Truth About Wolves, and then I wrote my memoirs of working with wolves as well, not necessarily for anybody, but so I remembered all those amazing little things that we used to do together, like laying in an enclosure after being at the pub at 12 o'clock at night with a full moon with all the wolves sleeping around you, those kind of amazing experiences that you just don't want to forget.
Guy, and I think also one of the biggest things I think that we have to find when we work with others is how to be humble, because that allows us to be more aware and more connected. And I think when you work with wild animals, even wild animals in a captive setting, you have to be humble. I did work in zoos before I came to dogs, and with me it was gorillas mainly, but big cats as well. But you learn about consent in the truest sense, if you want to learn about consent, work with a gorilla, but yeah,
and a wolf.
With a wolf, exactly. Yeah. So and you kind of connect to the majesty, don't you, of them?
You do, and what I really got from working with them, especially the welfare side, because I would be holding the wolves when they had injections or had procedures done, or when they were being sedated, or cleaning wounds if they'd hurt themselves. It learned me to really listen to those tiny whispers, those tiny little flicks that say, I'm not ready, can you just stop? And I would just pause. And like people would say to me, can I come in with you? And I'm like, no, I just need to be here on my own. So I observe them, they trust me, I trust them, I take it slowly. And you would not believe the kind of things that I was able to achieve with them. And we had one of our wolves broke his neck, and I rehabbed him back to walking. And we had another extra 4 years with him. This is an animal's in extreme pain, and he's letting me do physio exercises on him, or stand him up, or put pills down his throat, that kind of stuff, and it's all because there was that mutual trust and that understanding and that kind of respect for each other.
And interestingly, you weren't trying to be a wolf, and you weren't expecting them to try and be a human. And I see a lot of the wolfy stuff. We've got somebody down this way in the UK who is a wolf expert apparently, but it's a very kind of human ego, a kind of representation of that relationship with the wolf. You know, it's like, I know wolves and I will be wolf. And I think, we are human. I think it goes against thinking that the wolf hasn't maybe worked out that you're probably not a wolf, and actually they just need you to know what they are as a wolf to feel safe. Not that we have to be wolves. And we see the same with dogs, right? All the stuff, especially the early stuff, which is still repeated now. I know about. That's what the mom would do, so we have to do that too, and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't quite work like that, does it?
It doesn't, and I'm 4'11" 3/4. I'm a vegetarian. I'm tiny. I mean, the wolves used to put their paws on my shoulder and they would be up here, and if I didn't have their respect, then it just wouldn't work. The wolves were very much, if they took you off their Christmas card list, you never got back on it. And
Right.
I've had times I've had to step in between a wolf and a handler because a handler's done something wrong and the wolf's like, hang on, who are you? And I've just gone, no, and they've gone, oh, sorry, mum, and kind of wandered off. I'm tiny. They could have gone through me, but they didn't, because I had that working relationship with them. And it wasn't through fear or intimidation or strength, because I'm tiny, they're bigger than me. It was because I worked with them in a respectful way.
And that's important even for our relationship with dogs, right? Because as the amazing Rachel Leather says, you can't teach safety. You can't train trust, because the other has to feel that trust. They have to feel that safety. And that's what we experience, obviously, on the way that we work with dogs, because when that dog who is feeling deeply unsafe and untrusting, yeah, I was going to make a word up then, but trusting is the one. When they do offer that, when they say, I think I can be with you right now, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. And you can never achieve that through force. You can achieve something that might look like it because they're having to be compliant.
Yeah.
But for that dog to truly, or any animal really, to truly say, I can share this space with you, it's beautiful, isn't it?
It is. And I do a lot of work with reactive dogs, that whatever term you want to call it, dogs that are scared of other dogs or people because they've had a trauma, or have not had the right experiences. And we teach them that we are their support system. We'll help you, we'll deal with that dog running towards us. You don't need to do that because we're going to keep you safe. And these dogs just thrive. They really do. It's really lovely watching them being able to get closer to other dogs, or being able to look away from a dog, or go for a walk next to a dog. And some of our dogs now are walking, next to each other. They've been able to find pals because we've done it in a really slow, careful way and said, look, we're not putting you in a situation you can't cope with. You can absolutely cope with this because we're there to support you. And it's just beautiful watching it.
And that's really interesting, because we think about physical safety all the time, but we don't necessarily, and more widely, think about the importance of social safety and, of course, emotional safety. And that's what ultimately we have to try and support. And that animal has to feel those things, not just be doing something that we translate as being okay.
Yeah. And we build resilience as well to that, and even before Kathy Connor was talking about, the resilience rainbow, we were already, that's something that, we kind of do instinctivally, isn't it? I mean, they've kind of really formulated that, and it's fantastic. And I love it. And it's something that we can then tangibly give to our clients. But that resilience of, okay, something might come at you and it might be horrible and it might be scary, but actually you can bounce back from it really quickly. And I think that's something that we really need to start to concentrate with our dogs as well. Is just saying, what, life happens, it's not always nice. You do have to go to the vets, or you do have some numpty who lets their dog run up into your face, but let's get over it quickly.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of talk around the notion of self-regulation, moving away from nervous system dysregulation to kind of emotional resilience, as you told me things. And these are ultimately where we need to be talking about, because a lot of the stuff we're seeing online at the moment, of course, and we have had a bit of it today in the group, as I said at the beginning, which I had to kind of sort out. But if we just keep fighting things based on who does task better. We need to leave that conversation behind now, because when you look at all these aspects, the only two questions we really need to be asking is, does this dog feel any safer, and are they getting relief for whatever it is they were experiencing? And you will never answer yes to either of those things if that dog is being treated punitively. I think that's the key. And understanding these things is really important. And I think what an amazing experience to spend that time with the wolves. I think that's just an awesome aspect. And TTouch, of course, so many of the guests in the group, when they talk about those shifts for them, it's either one of three things: that dog who looks you in the face and says, what you think you know, you can forget about that, or a certain person. And we think about people like Linda Tellington Linda Tellington Jones, that's right, and Robin Hood, the sister, and Sarah Fisher and Sheila Harper, or they mention TTouch, because TTouch is more than just it's more than just a kind of a methodology or whatever you want to use it. It's a reason for being, isn't it? It's a very connective aspect of thinking about the relationship between two nervous systems.
Yeah, and Linda is just so ahead of her time. You know, for years and years and years, we've been talking about certain things, and then it suddenly becomes, you know, that scientific proof arrives. But we might have been doing it for years. And there's actually so much in everyday things that we do with our dogs now that people don't even realize have come from TTouch. You know, it's just something that just kind of evolves and kind of comes in. We're really quiet about it, but we can trickle in there. And for me, the big change of how I thought about dogs, because you mentioned earlier before we went live about, you know, what was it that really kind of grabbed you? It was learning the TTouch method, because it really changed my view of how dogs feel, how we should treat them, the respect we should have for them. Because at guide dogs back in the 80s, we were still using check chains. You know, the dogs were in kennels for hours and hours and locked away from 5 p.m. until 7 a.m. And, you know, all that's changed now. It's so much better. But I was like, oh, hang on. And at the same time, I actually did I think I did a day course in animal communication. And I was like, do you know what? These animals have got a soul, you know, and I hadn't even thought about it, you know, when I was in my early 20s. They were just, for me, dogs. But then I'm like, oh, hang on a second. You know, they can think, they can feel. They do have, you know, that sentient being thing, kind of light bulb came up on my head. It completely changed how I saw animals, and it completely changed how I work with them.
That's something about,
I said with them, not work at, you know, it is working with them, isn't it?
With them. And that's the thing about when we flip into being quite humble about these things and realizing that everything we're doing is a part of our own personal growth, to how we not only communicate and connect and support other better, especially dogs, but also for ourselves. I think a lot of us who start to work in this way, it gives us a real window into ourselves and our own care and sport needs, and how our own story has been altered by our trauma, by not having secure attachments at certain points in our life, and how, guess what, behavior is complicated. I think we went through a phase, because we had a very task-oriented view to behavior. It made it relatively easy, which is like, yeah, this is how we change behavior. And then, of course, we have all the arguments then about how best to do that. But when you actually just think of yourself, which is the only emotional experience you can truly validate, actually, is your own, you think, actually, I am greater than the sum of my parts. And actually, this behavior right now might not have nothing to do with anything other than that past experience before, and my ability to cope or not cope. So it's really interesting. So,
and that's how I also like really explain it to the dogs people, because they often say to me, I don't understand why they've done that. Like the dog might have been attacked by another dog. And I'm like, well, if you were on the tube on 7-7 when a bomb went off, do you think you'd like tubes today? Or do you think you'd still be a bit wary of them and have a big issue? And they go, oh, yeah. And it's like, you know, they don't, sometimes people struggle to get that concept of, you know, dogs can have PTSD. They can have these traumas that are lifelong because it was so traumatic in their heads. And obviously that's wired the brain, and they hold those emotions in their body as well. See, they're not going to let go of it easy. People say to me, can you fix my dog? I'm like, nope. Your dog has got a behavioural issue that would probably be lifelong, but I can give you tools to help them. And, you know, that's the thing that I really want to get across to people, is that it's not about fixing them. It's about supporting them.
And that's important, isn't it, of course, because our dogs, if a dog is more sensitive, if a dog has experienced trauma, if a dog's perception of threat to them is real, even though there is none, this is not being defective. It's just their story. We have to step in and support that. The analogy you use there with the tube is a really good example, because this is what we talked about a little bit earlier about, we tend to think a lot about physical safety, but there's a difference between being safe. You can be completely safe, but not feel safe. And you only have to go on a roller coaster ride, well, I do anyway, to know what that looks like, because I know I'm safe, but I don't feel it. And that's the most important thing. And I think this is the big shift that we've been making. This is the big shift from that TTouch brought, of course, which is moving away from maybe thinking my perception of Toni and her care and support needs and what's best for you might not be right. And maybe actually, if I'm going to get to do anything for you, it might be an idea if I got some feedback from you first. And that's kind of the crux, isn't it?
It is totally. It's listening to the animals. It's that they're the ones who know how they feel. And it's the same with also linking back then to, so many times people say to me, oh, my dog's not in pain. I'm like, how do you know? Because they can't, like, they can tell you, obviously, and we can feel it. And then you'll have vets that go, oh, no, they're not in pain. I'm like, really? How do you know that? You know, this is so many red flags to me that your dog isn't comfortable. And what's the trouble with helping them, even if we don't know? We know how hard it is to diagnose pain. So why do we not give dogs the benefit of the doubt? Because that is obviously going to link into how they feel safe as well.
And especially the overlooking of emotional pain. Physical pain, emotional pain, they're both equally valid, often interconnected, and both needing support and treatment, really, and you know, whatever term we want to use there. And I think it's really important. And it is hard, isn't it? Because when you have a dog who struggles, especially, you know, we know that adolescent dogs can struggle with regulation, but when you've got a dog whose nervous system, sorry, my dog keeps wanting to come in and out. Why is that nervous system struggling to regulate well? Why are we having constant nervous system dysregulation? Why is that dog, we're going to come on to this in a minute, struggling to sleep, struggling to settle, struggling to get good rest? And for me, it's always either a physical or an emotional component, or both. And I think we just have to take things in an evidential way rather than just slam the door on, no, it's not that. It's like, well, it might, or it's more accurate to say, we don't have evidence for that yet, but we need to keep that route open to see what we see with our perception and with our kind of data collection. So awesome. And this is an amazing start already. We've hit the ground running here, Toni. So we're going to come on to sleep in a mo. But for anybody who doesn't know, Toni and your writing buddy you mentioned earlier, Karen.
Yeah, Karen Bush.
You've for somebody who's dyslexic, you've turned into quite a prolific author, of course. So there's a great library there. Books on traveling in the car, fireworks, canine cognitive dysfunction. I'm trying to think of the ones there. Vets.
Yeah. Gardens, destroying gardens. Yeah, lots
so
of them.
Tell me a little bit about this. Do you look at your dog in the garden, digging a hole underneath your roses and think, yeah, gardens, I'm going to write a book on that? How does it come? Where does that next inspiration, or is it because you have a particularly challenging client that you have to really dig deep for? Where does it come from?
Do you know, that's a really interesting question. So Karen was the one who started this off and asked me to write with her. And sometimes it's because there is a particular issue going on. So we both lived with dogs at the time that were scared of fireworks. So it was to us instinctive to do a book to tell people all the things we'd done to help them. So that's where the first one came from. And then we kind of just brainstormed some ideas. And sometimes it is because I get clients who, maybe there's a number of clients with a particular issue, and I'll get interested in that issue and I'll like, oh, I want to learn more about that. Or sometimes it's because Karen or I have written an article for Your Dog magazine, which we both write for regularly, and we go, oh, that would be a really good book. So we then gather more information. So the ideas come from all over the place, really. But interestingly, when we were writing the travel book, we just rehomed, me and my husband had rehomed a dog from Battersea who didn't travel well. So I was actually practicing what I was preaching at the time. So I was doing the same thing. Oh yeah, that works. That oh yes, put that in the book. So yeah, it comes from everyday life, or it comes from a conversation, or it comes from seeing a multitude of people struggling with the same thing.
And I think what's quite unique about the books is they're well written. Not that's unique, but they're really easily accessible, because you've taken a lot of books out there that are really good, but they're quite big for caregivers to think, well, where's my section in this? I'm going to buy this book to find this thing. So to make it really specific, this is about dogs who struggle in the car. And because of that, you've been able to make them, they're not huge volumes, they're just really accessible. And they are actually very holistic in their approach, because, we use that term a lot. But they truly are. It's like, okay, this is a good in-depth overview of all the component parts here. And so it's not just a how-to, it's a why as well. And that's, I think, is really interesting. So did you deliberately think about the format in that way, or was it just how you write? And was it maybe because you got so used to writing articles and journal pieces that it really got your brain to think, right, I need to do this and put this across in the most simplest way possible?
I always write, I'm always one for taking the sciencey stuff and dumbing it down so that people can understand it real, because that is how I understand it. I'm not a massive academic, Karen's the one who is great at reading papers and taking the bits. I'm like, I'll skim through it and go, oh yeah, that bit's good. So she's always the one who checks everything to make sure everything's, correct. I just love, I've forgotten your question now. What was your question?
No, just wondering about, because they are written in a really concise way.
Yeah, the order.
I didn't know whether the writing articles is a good
for
grounding
me,
for thinking, right, I've got so many words here and I've got to get them all in.
No, for me, it's always like, I need to understand why it might happen. So people need to know why a dog might not travel. They need to know the tools that will help that dog improve. They need to know what might help holistically, as in remedies, or there's always a big section on TTouch. It's always about what is it that we have used that's really worked, and also then researching to know if there's anything that we haven't tried yet that we think, oh, actually that would be really good. So if other people have had an idea and we try that and go, oh yeah, that works. So for us, it's just about, like you say, they're skinny books. That's why we call them skinny dog books. That's our sort of publishing name. And it's about just giving everybody what they need. And the great thing about self-publishing, and people might say, oh, you self-publish, but both Karen and I have been published by publishers. We didn't feel like we needed to go down that route, because what happens then is we can update them. So when the next big thing comes that works really well, we can go, oh, we need to add that in the book so people get even better stuff. Which is why the Firebook book is on its second issue, is edition, because we've gone, well, do you know what, we didn't put sound masking in, or do you know what, we didn't put acupuncture in. So we can update them really easily. And actually in the back of the sleep book, what we've also done is listed all of the scientific papers that we read that helped us write the book and to understand it. So people who want to even go in deeper can. So there's always all those resources, there's always further reading, there's always like, do you know what, this is everything we know, but it doesn't mean that we are the experts. There might be more stuff, and here's the channels you can go down.
And that's really cool, because I think it's really important to make the latest stuff accessible for the general public. But there are some general public, I call them expert carers, who probably know more than me and you, Tony, especially before their own dog. I mean, because they've done more courses than I have, they've read more books than I have, because they're really into it, and they do want to deep dive. And of course, there are lots of professionals do as well, of course. Yeah. So let's bring us on to sleeps then, because this is cool. This is what the new book's about. Help My Dog Won't Sleep.
Yeah.
It's a really big thing, because when you we had Diane Garrett on with her talking about her stress detox and how important that is, and looking at these things. Good quality, that's the point, I think. Rest and sleep is really important for all of us.
It's fundamental, you can die just as easily from lack of sleep as you can from food and water. That's how important it is. Every single function in our body, all that housekeeping, getting rid of toxins, sorting our emotions out, boosting our immune system, you name it, it happens when we sleep.
Yeah.
It can't happen if we don't sleep. We don't get that. And it's the same for our dogs. There's so much stuff that goes on, whether it's in our brain or our bodies when we're sleeping.
And it goes both ways, doesn't it? Because if we are us humans, we almost celebrate dysfunction and stress. It's like, I work 90 hours a week. This is really brilliant. And most of our problems, that kind of runaway train of life, because we're living quite a dysregulated life, really. And that means then that the systems can't do what they got to do during sleep. So that affects sleep. And it can be the other way around. If we're not getting good sleep, it affects our ability. So it's really important when we look at all these different component parts to try and balance all those little knobs and dials to get things right. Yeah. So what was the inspiration for this book then? You were talking about lots of different things. Where did the idea for sleep come from? And what was the main, if we think about the bigger picture on sleep that you wanted to kind of put across here, then we can fine tune in on a couple of really important bits that we need to be considerate of.
So I came up with the idea having seen a client whose dog was struggling to sleep, and I was like, do you know what? It was so easy to fix this, but it wasn't necessarily apparent to the dog's people, and it made me start thinking about all the reasons why dogs don't sleep. At the same time, Karen wrote an article for Your Dog magazine on sleep. And she was like, this would make a really good book. And I was like, well, that's really interesting because I'm really interested in sleep right now. So it's kind of like one of those coming together things that we thought, that would be great. And then I put a webinar together, and that really became the backbone of the book. We kind of followed the webinar order, as it were, and just changed every slide into a chapter, basically. But yeah, it was from this little dog who'd been sleeping in a utility room, but it was a massive house, big glass windows down one side, and there'd been a storm, and things like a really bad storm, things had been blowing around, there'd be things hitting the window. Suddenly the dog don't want to sleep. And I'm like, okay, the dog was scared. It's obvious the dog are absolutely petrified while this storm was going on. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to move her out of the utility room for a start, because that room is now poisoned, right? She's scared of it. We need to change the nighttime routine so she doesn't feel like she's abandoned. She needs to be able to, be soothed and calm and fall asleep before you go to bed. How many times we chuck our dogs in the garden? They're all lovely and sleepy and curled upwards on the sofa. We chuck them in the garden. They get all excited running after whatever it is in the garden. We come in, and then if they're not sleeping with us in our bedrooms, we leave them. And they're like, oh, hello, I'm really awake now. So, there's so many things that affect how dogs, get disturbed. So it could be they're cold. So every winter about the same time when the temperature starts to drop, I get calls from people saying my dog won't sleep, and I just go, they're cold. Get them in a warmer place, or if they're with you and it's safe to do, have them in pajamas or whatever it is, or give them more bedding, or keep the heating on. I know that's controversial at this time, but you know what I mean. Then there's the dogs that are, frightened of stuff. There's the dogs who get disturbed by security lights coming on all night. There's the adolescent dogs that are hungry, we are all into these low carb diets these days. If anyone has ever tried to take carbs out of their diet, I did once. I was starving. I spent my whole time thinking about food. And these dogs that are growing, and they might have had their dinner at like 3, 4, 5 o'clock. By the time it gets around to sort of 3 in the morning, they're really hungry. And if you know what it's like, if you're hungry, you can't sleep. Can't sleep if you're cold. You can't sleep if you're hungry. Can't sleep if you're being disturbed. You can't sleep if you're scared. You can't sleep if you're lonely. There's all these things that these poor dogs, you know, we just don't think about. And it's simple to fix. They're really simple things to fix. And then the dogs get lovely sleep and they're all great. One of the reasons I know this book will do well is because it affects their people. Because then people get sleep deprived and they can't function. And of course, the dogs can catch up on their sleep in the day because they're polyphasic sleepers. Whereas if we sleep in the day, if we haven't slept at night, we don't get that restorative sleep. So that's why like shift work is really dangerous. Because if you're trying to sleep in the day, you just will not get the quality sleep you need that you would have got at night. So, you know, they can catch up on it, but of course it affects us so much that's why we get lots of calls from people because their dogs are struggling.
This is huge, isn't it? Just listen to you list all those things. Even, you know, we have quite a settled life here. We have a nice, quiet property. We have nice routines, but there is an arbitrary nature of like, we decide it's time for bed now, everybody off the sofa. And when you think about when that nervous system, especially when we think about sleep and sleep cycles, we don't know where that dog is or what that nervous system's like. And then everything has to keep resetting. And if the dog's already relatively well regulated, they probably manage it. When you already have a dog who has other things going on, it's a big thing. And having boundaries is important, of course. But this is a great example of where those boundaries shouldn't be barriers to unmet need. So you and I, I'm sure, and other professionals listening, will have had clients who are like, my dog's just crying all the time downstairs now. And we would say, have you thought about inviting them upstairs or maybe having him in the bedroom for a bit? Oh, no, we can't do that because of this, 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 and this. And it's that barrier then. It's like, well, it's not going to be forever, but maybe that's what your dog needs to try and get some better sleep. So it's interesting. Another one I find as well is we've got rid of everything in this house now that is chemical air fresheners.
Yes.
Because I noticed with Arthur, so Arthur's an old boy now. He's 11. That's Arthur, the collie-like dog there. That's Arthur. We noticed that the air freshener will go off and he'd get in and leave the room within literally a minute.
Yeah.
And then if the air freshener went off down in another room, he'd leave that one. So for him, he got more sensitive with it. And we've had some guests in the dog centre care talking about the potential chemical problems anyway, but all these things that their nervous system is under siege a lot of the time. Imagine that dog who's shut in the kitchen, and then every time that a cat goes through the garden, like you say, the security lights are on, and then the sudden drop in temperature because guess what, we're not going to heat that bit because we're not there. All these things are so important, Tony. This is fascinating stuff and really important.
And then they're nervous of noises and suddenly the dishwasher beeps like an hour after you've gone to bed. You know, think about your white goods and even them humming. You know, we might think it's completely quiet, but of course dog ranges are so much different. They'll hear stuff that, you know, even just, you know, people coming home from the pub at night, walking past the window and disturbing them.
Yeah.
There's just so many things, and because they light sleepers, you know, and that's how, you know, they sleep, they have these shorter cycles of sleep, but they can sleep more often as polyphasic sleeping. They can be woken
a little bit about that. Sorry,
really, really quickly.
Can you explain a bit more about the polyphasic side of things, just for people who don't know?
Yeah, so dogs will, over a 24-hour period, obviously, you know, in the day that your dogs are sleeping, you know, they'll sleep for periods of time. And as I was saying before, you know, we're monophasic. We have to have a block of 7 to 8, 9 hours sleep. That's what we need. And it happens at night. But for dogs, they can sleep at any time. And and the reason they can sleep at any time is because this polyphasic thing happens, because they are predisposed to waking up much easier. So even if they're in REM sleep, you can walk past them and disturb them, and then they'll be awake really quickly. You know, it's like you can't leave a room without your dog knowing that you've gone. And that's because they will wake from sleep a lot easier than we will. They go through the same stages of sleep, the 4 stages, like light sleep, and then they go into that bit where the breath rate comes down and the temperature comes down, and everything starts to kind of blood pressure comes down. Then they get into slightly more deep sleep, which is the stage before they go into REM sleep. But their REM sleep is a lot shorter than ours. It's like 6 minutes or something. So their whole sleep cycle is about 45 minutes, where ours is about 70 to 120 minutes. And we're in REM sleep a lot longer. But so because they've got this REM sleep, this is really important. This is the bit where a lot of emotions are sorted out. If your dog's had a bad day, their emotions we, kind of like regulating and working out. What it's like when you wake up, you've had a really bad day and you're like, right, let's sleep on it. There's a reason why there's a phrase that says, let's sleep on it, because the next day it always seems better, or you come up with a solution, right? Because your brain is like, have processed it through the day. So this is the same for the dogs. They kind of go through all those different systems, but they're much shorter. So when you think your dog is sleeping at night, when you're fast asleep, they're not. They'll be sleeping for periods and then they'll be awake, and they'll be sleeping for periods and then they'll be awake. But anyone who has dogs in their bedroom, they wake up in the night and just sort of turn over. You'd be surprised at how many times you see your dog just sort of sat there looking at you. Yeah. They don't have to sleep for that full 7-8 hours. They're not. That's why they're easily disturbed by a fox or something in the garden. That's why they're doing all these kind of like wandering around and sleeping in different places in the night as well, because especially for older dogs, a bit arthritic, and they're like, oh, I might need to lie on a cooler floor, or now I might need to lie in somewhere a bit warmer. I'm not comfortable, need to move around. Of course, that's another reason why older dogs don't sleep well, because they might be in a bit of pain. Yourself at night, pain is more, it's more intense.
Yeah.
So, so many things are going on. This polyphasic sleeping for me is fascinating. Just going back to the wolves, I remember doing taking them to a meet and greet somewhere once. And I was handling one of the wolves, Dakota, and she was on the floor, REM sleep. Her lids were like really going. Somebody walked past with a fur trim on their coat, only just stopped her getting it. She went from REM to wham. I know that's there and I want that. So, dogs can wake up really quickly, but that's what they're designed to do.
And if we think about the more sensitive breeds, especially who if they were, especially those with maybe a working line, where they would have enforced restful environment by being in a kennel or whatever it is, but they find that during the day there's a huge amount going on, they're not even getting proper rest then, and then at night, if they can't have that opportunity to have some of that more settled sleep as well, it starts to become a real problem, doesn't it? Over time, it's a build-up.
It's strange when you start to think about how much sleep dogs want. We've been led to believe that they need hours and hours and hours, and actually the latest research tells us they don't need as much as we think they do. So interestingly, a puppy at 16 weeks is probably on average needing sort of just about 11 or a little bit more than 11 hours in a 24-hour cycle. And adult dogs are just about sort of 10. So you can think about, obviously you've got younger puppies, you've got older dogs. So there is a huge range of time. So some might need a lot less than that. Some might need a lot more. So I don't think that, like us, there isn't an average. I do well on 7 hours a night. My husband, if he could have 10 hours a night, he would just be right. He'd be great. That's how much he needs. So they're all individual. So sometimes I think when we force dogs to say, well, you must sleep, especially those working breeds, they don't actually need as much sleep as we have been led to believe. Yes, it's really important. And yes, we need to create that environment for them to be able to get that restful sleep. But for people who worry at home about their dogs not getting enough, I wouldn't panic so much, because of course, again, even if they had a bit of a disturbed night, they'll catch up with it in the day. We won't, but they.
You think it's more about, rather than sleep per se, although sleep is important, as we say, it's not that it isn't. It's about a dog's ability to have the opportunity to have periods of time during the day where their nervous system can be at rest.
Yeah, definitely. And then they will choose whether they can get into sleep or not.
Yeah,
You know, if you have a dog that shouts at the window every time someone goes past, they're not going to be resting properly. So what do? Well, we can help them to not do that by having them not in that room, or having frosting on the window, or having sound masking on, or whatever it is we need to do to help them to be able to regulate themselves better. So it's not about telling them off and saying, hey, you know, stop doing that. It's creating the environment that helps them to go, I can rest now. This is nice.
And that's important, because thinking back to the working, because, you know, it's a bigger picture, I know, about what dogs are bred to do and what should we be breeding them to do things. But when you think about working dogs who are spending part of their day in a kennel, it doesn't mean they're necessarily sleeping, but they are in a situation where they're not sensorily overwhelmed, and that sensory integration process can function better. I think we forget how busy our homes are. As I say, even without meaning to be, even the olfactory stuff we've talked about, the auditory stuff that we don't even hear, as well as all the comings and goings, and then on top of that, we can be restricting their space to saying you must stay in this bit.
Yeah, but also on the flip side of that, how many dogs have spent all day sleeping because there's nothing else going on because people are out working and they're a bit bored, and then so many clients say to me, oh, the evening, my dogs is just so busy, they're wanting to play. It's like, well, one, they're crepuscular. So that's another reason why dogs wake, especially young dogs, wake people up early in the morning, because of course they're ready to know it's dawn and dusk. This is when we go hunting. This is when we're awake. This is our time. And they haven't yet regulated themselves to our pattern, and they can, but it takes time. So that's why your younger adolescent dogs are waking you up early in the morning. But when in the evening, they've been doing nothing all day, of course they're going to have energy, and it's their time when they would be out like running around and hunting things and being more active anyway. So we also have to think about their circadian rhythm, because we often don't appreciate that their rhythm is different to our circadian rhythm.
And that's important, isn't it? Because it's interesting putting it in that framework, actually, because this notion, you know, I always think about the fact that we have multiple nervous systems under one roof. And even us as humans, my husband and I, when we first started living together, and you kind of end up in a situation eventually where those nervous systems start to become more in a line, and you follow the same kind of patterns. And I think it's the same invitation for our dogs. Diane, hi Dan, I mentioned you earlier, asked about a link to that sleep study. So maybe we could share that at some point, if that would be all right.
So there are so many.
Yeah, cool. Well, the latest one, especially because the perceived wisdom in the past has been, you know, dogs need X amount of sleep a day, and they need so much REM sleep. I'm guessing these kind of studies are implying something different, that it's a little bit more fluid than that, a little bit more open than that. And I think that would be really interesting. I'd be looking at. So maybe we could, if you could ping me a few of them, I can share them in the group.
Yeah, sure. I will. Yeah.
Great. Well, this is really interesting. So let's just think about, so we already kind of touched on one perceived wisdom that maybe we need to reconsider. What other things, when you were doing the research, made you think, wow, that's interesting, because that's either something you hadn't even thought about regarding dogs and sleep, or was a bit of a challenge to some of the stuff that we might already perceive and think we know?
For me, it was all the stuff linked to things like immunity and, that health side. So there's a study with, and I actually did a lot of study also on human sleep, and got really into, oh my goodness, do you realize that if you do this and that happens? So there's studies that say for humans, if you don't get enough good sleep the day of a vaccination, your immunity isn't as high. So you then start to think, well, actually, if your dog has been to the vets and been scared and been vaccinated, and then that disturbs their sleep because they're all a bit, that affects their immunity and how much that vaccine will be uptaken. You know, there's so many things, and also how dogs learn. So there's also studies that says there's great studies that said that actually dogs play after they've learned something, that they remember it better. But also, if dogs have a good sleep after they've learned something new, they'll remember it better.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these things that kind of link, and you're like, oh, right, okay. So we do need to do things like completing the stress cycle. So if they had learned something or they've been a bit scary, we want to let them let that out by having something fun, and then maybe do some decompression. But then getting a good sleep after that as well is really important. So it's all those things about the cognitive way that they learn, and how much it affects their health, and linking to things like human dementia. We know now that it's to do with plaque building up in the brain, and that often happens. That plaque gets cleared from the body more when in sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So again, with our dogs, with their cognitive dysfunction as they get older, is it the same reason? Well, I'm maybe naively, but assuming it's the same, because their brains are the same, right?
Mm. So
so many times we've looked at it and we've seen the same areas of the brain light up for the same things. Like, for example, when dogs dream, the same area of the brain lights up from when they are doing in prey drive. So can we assume then that dogs are chasing rabbits in their sleep? Well, no, we can't assume anything, but it's an interesting concept, isn't it?
Well, it is, and especially when you see their legs going like this. They're running away. So at what point during the sleep cycle does that enzyme that flows over the brain that is healthy to wash away toxins, at what point does that happen?
Oh, now you're asking, because now I can't remember, but it's going to be in probably the third or the fourth part of. So I think mainly the third stage of sleep is the bit that deals with all of the health stuff, and then your REM sleep is the bit where you have more of those vivid dreams that sort out your emotions.
It's important even for us, isn't it? And I think I was watching something on a documentary recently looking at the human sleep cycle, and which averages, like you said, it's like between 75 and 120, but they were averaging it at about 90 minutes. And how some people, they're not able to go through full cycles before they kind of wake up, and the impact that they're seeing on a lot of these systems, and it's really interesting. So I think what the big take home for me then is this isn't necessarily about amount of, it's about quality of, not just sleep, but also rest, nervous system rest, the ability to kind of recoup and recover for the next stress that comes along. And many of the dogs we work with, some of the stresses for that dog are pretty obvious, but some of them are, we need to dig deep and find them, because that they're just not able to find that truly restful state. But have you worked with cases where just by identifying sleep and rest has been hugely transformative for everything else?
Well, like I said, dogs can catch up with their really, proper sleep, because they're polyphasic at lots of different times in the day. So as long as they get some sleep, good quality sleep, I can't really say whether it's because of their sleep or not sleep. It's kind of, one of those things that you can assume, but maybe you don't know for sure. For me, the most important thing about this book is to get people to realize why their dogs aren't sleeping at night and keeping them awake, because let's not get the human involved in this, because we can't catch up on our sleep in the day, and it really does affect us. And how many people have said to me, I'm starting to really resent my dog because I'm not sleeping at night, and they just don't seem to realize the dog's need. And it's go back to that need, that social context, that feeling safe. If they're not feeling safe, they're not going to sleep, or they're not going to rest in that time when we're resting. They're going to disturb our quality of sleep. So for me, the book is primarily about helping humans as much as it is about helping dogs, but getting them to understand that they're not doing it out of spite. They're not doing it because they're naughty. Doing it because they need something. And people say to me, I shouldn't go down for them, or I should let them cry it out. We know, like, for example, puppies, they've been taken from their mothers and their litter mates. They're in a place they don't know. They've traveled in a car. They with people they don't know. They're in an environment they don't know. And we expect them to sleep on their own. They're at their most vulnerable stage of their life. Yet we put them downstairs because that's what the breeder told us to do, or the internet told us to do. No, that dog needs to be with you. They are vulnerable. They need that support. But yet, no, we're told to cry, let them cry it out, it's fine. And luckily, most people don't let them cry it out. They go to them, they spend time with them, they sleep with them.
And I think this overemphasis on the notion of reinforcement. We get told that all the time. So if you have your puppy in your bedroom, you've now reinforced that, and they'll never settle anywhere else. And I think we've got to break away with that. You know, with Molly, she was in our bedroom from day one. Then when she was a bit older, she's on the bed. Now she doesn't go on the bed. She does actually, Tony. She creeps on about 4 o'clock, probably because she gets colder.
Cold. Yeah.
But there came a point where we were getting to the point where we're thinking, right, we need to think if Molly can go somewhere else now, because it's bad enough sharing a bed with your partner. But she decided, I'm not going to share the bed with these two anymore. And she went off and did her own thing. And Arthur, we never see him in the bedroom hardly. He can be in there if he wants to. He finds a place. So I think you're absolutely right. The most important thing in those first few months is just creating those secure attachments.
Yeah.
So if you got any questions, now's the time to pop them in for us. And we've got a couple of things here that we can have a look at. Pop them in, and I'll have a look as well. So I don't know.
And while you're just looking, it's like how many of our clients have like very, very timidly go, "Oh, let them sleep in the bedroom." And I'm like, yeah.
Yes.
And they're like, oh, like, no, that's the best place for them. And you'll see that in the book. The theme is always, if you can, have them in the bedroom with you, you know. And like you say, you can migrate them out if you really need to migrate them out over, you know, when they've grown up a little bit. But so many dogs I see with separation anxiety issues are created in those first few days when you've isolated them and not had them in the bedroom with you. Teach them to be on their own in the day when you could do micro leavings, not at night.
Yeah. And I love that expression, micro leavings, because I think a lot of actually what we have, again, perceived wisdoms, when we start thinking about the way that we're looking at stuff now, the two main areas I think we have to have a big rethink is what we do with dogs sub 12 months, because a lot of that is just back to front, upside down. And what we do with reactive dogs, you know, those sensitive dogs, about how we actually think about improving their ability to feel safe. Okay, so Heather asks about, this is more of a wide one actually, and I don't have the answer myself, but her vet has suggested that maybe her dog has ADHD. Do you know of any info on dogs and ADHD? Have you come across that in your research, Toni?
I know there is research going on, I think, in the States at the moment. MIT were doing some, and it was sort of linked into canine compulsive disorder stuff. Then there was a mention in a paper that they thought, and I know it's different because it's autism, but there was just a brief, someone sort of said, oh, we think it's canine compulsive disorder, but it looks very similar to autism. So I know there is more research going on. So I don't know if it's out yet. The best thing is to go into Google Scholar, isn't it? And just put in ADHD in dogs and see what comes up. Because
there is research being done more generally on sensory defensiveness for dogs. And the breeds that they're using are English Bull Terriers and Border Collies.
Yeah.
And I think, again, when we think about what comes under sensory defensiveness, and if we cast that net wider, thinking about ADHD, neurodivergence, like you said, Toni, you know, a lot of what the latest science is telling us is just joining the dots to the similarities between us and dogs.
Yeah.
And actually, when I did my human psychology degree, most of the stuff I was learning was done on stuff in dogs. So we're just doing it the way around now. So, but yeah, I think it kind of makes sense, I think, when we think about the ability for the brain to go through that sensory integratory process and put away good information, and some of the filters there that might be working differently. It's not about defects or things that are damaged. It's just different. And we have to recognize, without being too human about it, that maybe some of these dogs' ability to, they neurobiologically need more time than we're giving them to make sense of stuff because they get overwhelmed too quick. And there's a lot of stuff, like say, some of these puppies, the moment they come inside our door, they're already being hit with a million things, right? It's tough.
Yeah.
Good. So somebody look here. Let's have a look. Is there any truth in saying let sleeping dogs lie?
Yes.
Yes, 100%. I think.
Yeah,
Let
don't
sleeping
wake them up
wolves
when they're
lie
in.
as well.
Yeah, don't wake them up when they're REM sleep, because it's so important that they get it. And theirs is so much shorter that they really need to have that go through all 4 stages of sleep. But that REM is really important. Remember, it's only going to last about 6 minutes. So if they are keeping awake by going woof, woof, and making lots of lovely noises, just go, oh, that's really nice. It will stop in a minute.
Isn't it funny how many people think, oh, my dog's having a nightmare, I must wake him up?
Yeah. And do you
Happens a
remember,
lot.
but actually sometimes if they've had a bad day, they could be reliving, just like us. We know that dogs sleep less well. That's a really bad sentence, but you know what I mean. If they've had a bad experience in the day, just like us, they can sort of struggle to sleep or not have such good quality sleep. So they are working out their emotions. So they might be, but it's important that they do, because it will help the brain process it. But also, going back to the sleeping dogs lie, like the sleeping dogs lie thing, of course, you don't want to wake a dog up when it's in deep sleep, when he or she is in deep sleep, because the startle response. And some dogs will come out, fighting, because they've suddenly been woken up. And how many of us are woken up suddenly and will punch somebody? It's the same. That's
a really good point, isn't it? Because you have that kind of abstract normal profile in the middle for people, and you always have people who are outside that and act differently and maybe sleepwalk or sleep talk or can be quite violent in their sleep. We act out things differently, and I just don't see any reason why dogs might not have different presentations there. And we've all worked with those dogs who do come out of sleep into that kind of almost from sleep into rage. Actually, it's an instant thing, and how much of that is maybe kind of going to the areas of focal seizures maybe and things like that. But these are extra components parts. But really interesting. One of my labs is an ex-breeding dog rescued from a puppy farm. She will wake up at 3:34 each night, and lately has woken up at 2:30. She sleeps in our bedroom. I stroke her and put a blanket on her each time. Is there anything else I can do?
Does she then go back to sleep after you put the blanket on her?
Yeah, Emily, does the dog go back to sleep when you give him that reassurance? Just let us know in there. But I think this is a good example of the role of trauma with some of these things, and also what might have happened at that particular time in that setting. Who knows about a lot of things about feeling safe there, I think.
But also 2-3 o'clock in the morning is the coldest part of the night. And if the blanket is then helping that dog go back to sleep, if the dog's in the bedroom and you can get some nice, safe, like fleece coat. My lurcher, when he was alive, bless him, I started off by having to wake up. He'd wake me up. I'm cold, Mum, my blanket's fallen off. So I'd have to wake up and put the blanket back on him. Got him pajamas. Then I didn't get woken up.
It's interesting. And Emily does say yes at times, not always, but yes at times. And I think it's a case of trialing different things to try and stack those cards in your favor for those nighttime evenings.
And interesting, if you get down on the floor, because people go, oh no, the room's really warm. Get down on the floor and check if there's any drafts. And also notice how much colder it is when you get on the floor. Even in a heated room, it's like a couple of degrees colder. And also, Pete and I go to our band rehearsal every Wednesday. We're involved in a band, and the room is really cold. I come home with really cold feet. It takes me ages to warm up. So even if the blanket's going over your dog when they've woken up because they're cold, it's going to take a while sometimes to warm back up again. So they might not necessarily go back into sleep easily if they're still trying to warm up, having had that blanket not been on them. So this is another way of thinking about it. Just try these things.
Yeah. Tima says, one of my dogs, when they come into bed, body slams as she leaves and comes back while she's sleeping in the bed. I can't sleep through that. Any tips? She's just trying to be close, but yikes.
But I don't quite understand the question.
I think it's just the kind of physicality of that dog being kind of, as it moves around in the bed and then kind of falls on it. Harley, our black lab's a bit like that. He kind of, he doesn't creep on and find a nice little spot. He's going to be like right on top of you.
So I'm guessing really the only sensible thing there, if the sleep is really being disturbed, is maybe encourage your dog not to be on the bed, but be beside the bed in a really nice bed, or having their own bed that's raised, that's next to your bed, so that they are actually separate but near you. I know people who have done amazing things, like had like cribs next to their bed for their dog to sleep on, or they've built things so that there's an extension to the bottom of the bed so that their dog can have that bit, but they can still have the rest of the bed. So
it's interesting how important beds are themselves, because this was Sarah Fisher who gave this advice, and she was dead on. So Harley, my black lab, there he is there. We had one of those plastic style beds with the backs like that. And he'd go to bed, that's fine, but he wouldn't settle there for very long. And Sarah said it's probably because he can't stretch out on that bed. So we replaced that for a foam big bed, and he'd stay there all night. And even where the bed is sometimes, and if it's up against something so they can't get comfortable, these kind of things can be important, right?
Have you ever slept on a sofa that's too short for you? How uncomfortable is it? It has to be the right size for the dog. And also, interesting, lots of dogs like pillows. My dog literally used to wander around with a cushion in his mouth so that when he laid down, he could put his head on it. And I know so many dogs who do that. Think about, especially lurchers with those long necks. They don't, like us, they don't want to lie flat. They need support for their head. Yeah.
And actually, if they were to dig a bit of a hole to lie in, they'd probably get that undulating difference. That's really fascinating. Right, brilliant. Okay, look, that's great. Well, that's amazing. So thank you, Toni. It's got me thinking about a huge amount of stuff, and I always love hearing you and learning from you. And we've had some great comments in the group. So have a little check in on that later on. What we'll do is we'll make sure we share a link to the book in the chat here, but also in the main group. When I put this up onto YouTube and share that in the group, we'll make sure we put the links in there as well. Anything you want to leave us with, Toni, before we go? Any last little?
I just hope you all have a lovely night's sleep.
That's so cool.
It's very important.
Yes. Oh my God, we're all going to be doing different things now, I think, to try and. I'm looking forward to the day when I'm old enough that my husband and I can have single beds. I can't. That's how my parents were eventually. My mother would be in one bed with her curlers in. My father would have a copy of the Observer or the Guardian, doing his crossword, and it looked like marriage bliss then. Marriage bliss. Your own bed. But there's something to be said, actually, I think, for when we share beds, having a really good mattress is important, because we have to make sure our bit is supporting us, and as well as the other side. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Toni, so much. We're going to look at these things. Don't forget Toni's other brilliant books as well. If you want to hear more, Toni, we're going to be having a chat on the Pet Remedy page soon as well. We're going to be talking about that. Pet Remedies mentioned in the book. Just so you all know, 28th, next Tuesday, we've got the wonderful Kay Scott coming in from Bedlington Terrier Rescue. Bedlington Terrier Rescue is this month's rescue of the month. So if you enjoy the chats and you feel like you want to just show a little bit of appreciation, just every pound, every dollar, or euro, whatever you use, that's the place to do it. So I'm picking a rescue each month. Then we've got Shay Kelly on the 3rd. Shay, it's going to be interesting because we keep having to cancel, Toni. But we're determined to get this one done. Matt Donovan on the 12th and Colin Spence on the 17th. So some really good conversations coming up. Look out for those. Thank you again, Toni.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everybody. Everybody's saying thank you. They're all saying amazing stuff. And that is true, because it has been amazing. And good. Well, good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. If you're watching this on the YouTube, subscribe. I remember to do that. Apologies again for all the horrible stuff that's been in the group, but I got rid of it. Anybody who didn't catch the beginning, if you do see anything in the group that you don't like, that you feel is unkind or whatever, just report it and we'll get on it. Thanks, Toni. Thanks, everybody. See you soon. What have we got here? Oh, there it is. Oh, hang on a minute. I'm saying goodbye now. We're going to have to say goodbye again in a minute. How does that work then? Oh, I don't know what's going on. That's a bit odd, isn't it? I've lost my... Oh, there you go. Bye, everybody. See you later.